Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on the importance of engineering effectiveness in a down market. Thanks for making the time today. We have an expert panel, and we will go through a very, hopefully, interactive and open conversation on this, I think, very timely topic that's on a lot of people's minds. I'll start off with a quick introduction. I'll hand it over to our panelists for some introduction, and we'll jump in pretty right away. A few small housekeeping notes here. We're using this Demio tool. You'll notice on the side there's a free-form chat, like most of these tools do. Please feel free to use that. We will encourage that, and we will be most actively addressing things through the chat. So if you want to have that conversation, use the chat. We'll also be using some interactive polling throughout the session, so look for that. It's in two different tabs, most commonly on the right side, unless you've reconfigured it somehow for yourself. We'll jump in right here. As a quick introduction of myself, Joe Levy. I was an engineer a long time ago. I've had various roles in product and other kind of business leadership functions, and founded UpLevel just a bit over 4 years ago to focus on what I saw this really emerging pain point of, hey, we're trying to understand what engineering is working on. We're trying to make sure it's mapping to business needs. We're trying to make sure the work is happening in a efficient manner, but also in a way that really supports the nuance of this highly artistic discipline. It's been a really fun journey, and along that have had the opportunity to work with and meet some great leaders in the space. 3 of those we have are lucky with us to join us today. And so what I'll do now is I'm going to hand it over in just order of these boxes to Michelle, Mike, and Vilas to introduce themselves, and then feel free to give your backgrounds and maybe why you're here. And then I'll kick it off with some conversation. So without further ado, Michelle, would you like to take it away on introductions?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. I'm Michelle Salvato. I'm up in Portland, Oregon, and I was in the technology space for more than 25 years, product development. Started as an engineer, and my last role was executive of product engineering for a cybersecurity company. I am now focused on helping leaders grow and develop through executive coaching and leadership development. And the reason why I'm here, because I think it's super important that leaders help their organization, especially engineering leaders, help their organization during these kind of crucial moments of downtimes and uncertainty. And so this is a topic near and dear to me.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I'm Mike Stanke. I'm currently VP of Engineering over at Phlox, which is a small startup that's working on kind of changing software development lifecycle stuff. So it's all around, I guess, Nix packaging, if you've ever heard of that. It's all about immutable infrastructure, things like that. Previous to that, I spent 4 years at Circle CI and 8 years before that at Puppet. So I've been in the dev tool space for the last, 12, 16 years. I don't know, however long it's been. I did a lot with DevOps research and kind of what makes teams effective, what makes teams really go. And from 2018 to 2022 was an author on the State of DevOps report. So, pretty plugged into this space, and then applied it in different ways at different engineering organizations and helped a lot of other teams along the way as well.
Cool. And I'm Vilas. I drive the developer experience team at Bill. And in the past, I've been at Netflix for about 4 years, and then at Walmart, driving the developer productivity space. And so I'm very passionate about this, and especially with the experience that I've gained going through the last recession in 2008, gave me quite a few things to talk about. So let's get into it.
That's great. Great bunch of backgrounds. Fun to have folks from DevOps and folks from big companies on various sizes to really think about the space. So we will, how this flow will work, I have sort of 3 main topic themes to kick us into some conversations here, some polls on each of those. And again, highly encourage folks to use the chat forums for topics they'd like to dig into further or ways they'd like to steer the conversation. We will make it virtually interactive in that sense. But to kick it off with a comment that I think Michelle really touched on in her intro, I think we should for sure acknowledge that the last year has been a pretty tumultuous year for those in tech. If people weren't affected personally, I'm sure they had folks, friends in their friend circle that were. It has been a bit of a reversal of the last 15 years of unprecedented growth. And to kind of kick that off, Esther, if you could kick up a poll, our poll number 1, where we want to get a sense from you all on this panel today, excuse me, on the webinar today. How do you believe the headcount of the teams that you've worked with has changed in the past year, in the past 12 months? And so what we're specifically asking in this poll is, has your organizations gone through significant growth, a little bit flat, or downturns that have happened? And it'll be interesting to see these things come in. We'll give this a minute just to load here. I already see strong towards some mild downsizing. Some flat as well. A few more minutes, see if a few more people chime in. Interesting. So we're starting to see a bit of a somewhere between flat and a little bit down, with a few folks having much more significant downturns. And this does reflect what we mostly see in the news, and frankly, what we hear circumstantially, and is perhaps a good setup for the first question, which I'll throw out and maybe give perhaps to Michelle first, since she commented on it, but then open it up to the rest. What tactics do you find most helpful most effective, or ineffective, when trying to level set what engineering can deliver with a smaller size team? So to make sure I ask that question clearly, you had a team of 100 or 1,000, and now you're down, according to this poll, perhaps by 5 or 50. How do you go to the business and say, this is my new realistic delivery ability?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me as a leader, because I've been through this, right? I think first and foremost, I always lead with transparency. So prior to this event, I would have been quite transparent about what the team can do, where they're at, what they're accomplishing. And then with an event like this, I would clarify what this means. What are the trade-offs, right? What are we either stop doing, or what is now going to take longer, right? And so communication, I think, is one of the key things, and making sure that working with the product management team and the other leaders in the organization, the other executives in the organization, that we're all aligned on what our priorities are, right? So that we can have those difficult conversations about maybe something's not going to be delivered or something's going to take longer. You mentioned ineffective, and I would call out here, because unfortunately, I've seen leaders do this, where maybe they don't communicate the impact, right? Maybe because they struggle to communicate the impact, whatever it is. And then when things drop, either things miss dates or deadlines, they look for who can they blame, what excuses can they point to, right? Versus calling it out that, hey, when we did this impact, it should have been very clear and upfront that when we take this kind of action, this is the results of that. This is what's not going to get done, or this is what's going to be delayed, right? Setting expectations up front versus trying to deal with it after the fact.
Yeah, I think to jump onto that, another thing that commonly happens is if the work changes, maybe the feature work changes, and you guide it and you say, okay, you had these 5 or 6 things in flight. Now we're only going to have 3 or 4 or whatever after some type of cut. The thing that I think often gets overlooked is that if you have maintenance or KTLO operations, a lot of times those don't actually shrink. And so if you had 10 things across 10 teams, and now you only have 8 teams. Now you have 10 things across 8 teams, which means each one of those 8 teams is now slowed down and has new additional drag. And they also have to learn those things that maybe they didn't have to know as well when they were on different teams. And so you have to kind of look at overall system throughput and drag that goes on when you make a cut like that, particularly if you're cutting whole sections or whole teams where you're not actually getting rid of that, entirety of the responsibility. And I think a lot of leaders kind of gloss over that pretty quickly because the management's really asking about feature sets and business level revenue tied goals, and they're not really thinking about the maintenance and KTLO activities. But that percentage of time actually goes up when you reduce the number of people to spread it across, and so that's a thing that I think gets commonly missed. And so I will start with that a lot of times and just say, hey, just from the math, here's what you've done. You've automatically removed this much capacity raw and then this much in compounding from the KTLO efforts. So that's how I usually start with the conversation.
So I think just for someone who asked what KTLO is, it's keep the lights on. So essentially anything that is needed to continue run the business. But I want to talk about what Michelle said for a second, right? Which is transparency. I think that's key. What do you not want to get done? And I also jump to what Michael said, which is that there is lesser capacity. What I have observed is that usually when the capacity decreases, it increases the value of the work that is getting delivered. So you go to high value targets immediately. So in my opinion, the effectiveness, and Joe, I think you will use the word effective, which for me is you're doing the right thing correctly. Like you're doing not just efficiently, but also effectively, you're actually delivering effectively. That requires that concentrated focus. So it's essentially transparency from the leadership, basically that says, oh, we are not going to focus on this, but also with this reduced capacity, every single thing that we are working on is of extremely high value. And hence each of your contributions is extremely essential to get this done, right? So that sort of, for me, is that transformation process going from, I don't know, a up market to a down market maybe, but that's what I've seen works.
Mike, is there a scenario under which you can say, hey, the KTLO needs to shrink if we're shrinking the story? Meaning, as someone commented here in the chat, like it is running the business, but if you're decreasing the people that can run the business, the business might just have to get real comfortable with, longer outages, higher support costs, something that the burden of that cannot fall 100% on engineering.
Yeah, I mean, you can have the conversation. Realistically, I would say I haven't seen it pan out very often in my career. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with it. I've definitely tried to have that conversation. And, the obvious solution from any leader is to cut the things that are either not having a high ROI or cut the things that are maybe big bets that are not, they have no near-term payoff or whatever. And most leaders don't like to cut things. And even though they say they're very willing to stop doing things and they'll listen to all of it, they don't. I just, I mean, maybe I'm a unique person here, but I don't think I've ever had like a big business thing that I proposed to be actually cut. I've had it shrunk in maintenance, and it's like, well, that's cool. We're going to just limp it along longer. And now it's a bigger pothole to step in and avoid later. But ultimately, if you could cut something that had minimal usage and you could get it done, the thing is that also takes effort. And so like to do that, you have to, you have to basically fund a project to spin something down. And that's something that sometimes people want to do and sometimes they don't. But I mean, the cost of retiring anything, regardless of market space, is so much higher than introducing it that's something you just have to keep in mind always. And no one wants to spend the precious cycles they have on spinning down something. So that's just not a thing that has worked out super well. It's a good idea, and in practice in theory it makes all the sense in the world. In practice, I haven't seen it very well adopted, and usually it's kind of, okay, I'm just going to limp it along with the rest of the stuff that I'm doing. It's going to get less good attention.
Yeah,
I think Michael, to your experience, right? What I've seen is that usually it just gets forgotten about for a bit, right? So people forget about it for 6 months, and then someone is still chugging along, doing something in the background thanklessly, and then eventually, when that person either leaves or is frustrated from that, that's when someone else comes in and says, oh crap, I thought we closed this down a while back, and then it hasn't. So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. It doesn't go away as soon, which is why we have these ramp down projects for big sort of decisions and big tooling and things like that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
The other thing on that is some companies, you know, that they spend the effort to spin it down, or they think they're going to spin it down, but then they only do half of it, or they say, well, we're underwater on this from an ROI perspective, but we can't afford to take the revenue hit. And so it's like, we know that we're losing money every time we sell one of these, but it would cut revenue by 5%, and we just can't have that. And so, you know, you have to, I mean, I understand that there's all ends of that conversation. It's just, it usually turns out with not the great end landing on engineering from my experience.
There's a great question in the chat that exacerbates kind of the cyclical nature of this. So let me read it word for word because it's good. Reducing the KTLO requires investment in automation to remove the manual effort, which further taxes available engineering resources. And this is a common thing you see, you know, where you can never get out of the hole to get KTLO down the right way. So you just keep stacking it up in this painful way. And it would seem like in an up general market, when you can kind of keep throwing bodies at problems, the pain of that is not felt in the same way. When you have to downsize, it does get pain. The pain really starts to get, red hot. Does that help you show it where you're like, look, we can't even get out of our own hole? I mean, at what point is it all we do is KTLO? We can't even build a single feature because we're literally just supporting.
Well, I mean, that goes back to what
I think,
Mike said.
sorry,
I
go
think
ahead.
that goes back to what Mike said, which is, you know, nobody ever wants to stop that revenue that's coming in, even if it means like, hey, no new features, but if customers are still going to pay for it, then we'll just keep the lights on, right? I think a lot of leaders, I think the point that Lee brings up here in his comment is a lot of leaders, when you talk about making these cuts, what they're not showing the business is, hey, we need a little bit of a surge to shut these things down before we just like cut things, or to convert these things so that they're automated or whatever, and then we can cut, right?
Yeah.
So putting the proposals on the table that says, yes, I understand we have to cut, but if we can do this work first, then maybe we can recoup later, right? And so that's a conversation.
And I think, Michelle, that requires product to be a partner as well, because what happens typically is that these decisions can't be taken by engineering alone, right? If you're taking a decision, you want to partner with your product folks and your program management folks to basically say, if we did this, how can we turn this down without facing significant headwinds, right? And that's typically, and that's what I mentioned as a ruthless prioritization exercise. If we have that, right, then it's transparent to the whole company, because we are all in it together. You have to be saying, oh yeah, it's not just one team or the other. We all have to do this so that everything can work. But yeah, without product in supporting engineering, it can't go anywhere.
Yeah, kind of back to the automation front. The thing that I've noticed, oddly enough, is that during times of rapid growth and you're building out lots of features, automation actually isn't thought about that much because you're trying to get features out the door a lot. And so you have a lot of, you can get out of a problem by hiring more people. And so if you have a green light to just hire, it's just, okay, we're just going to hire more people. You know, you're going to double engineering year over year or whatever. I've been on those hyper growth. It's fun, but like, that's the way you solve every problem is we'll hire more people to solve this. And when you start to get the belt tightening up, that's actually when people start to care about efficiency. And so that is a good time to talk about automation, but then you're already kind of in that KTLO rut. And so it doesn't mean that you can't solve it that way, but you do have to kind of figure out how you're going to isolate time and say, hey, let's do this a little bit differently, and make an investment in some automation or something that reduces the maintenance curve. Like, because what you want to do is change the slope of that line of how much maintenance is coming in. You don't just want to do the ticket and close it. You want to make sure that ticket never comes in again. Things like that. So that's the work you have to do there, and it just seems like it inversely matches where it should be when you have investments available.
Just to catch up for a second, Vilas, on your comment, someone said vigorous nodding. There's no animocons for Demio, but I'll interpret that. Mike, on your point, or as you were speaking here, by the way, the chat questions will always win over my agenda. So just so you know that's where I'm prioritizing. Are there ways to let the lights dim a little, in quotes, to incrementally invest in the needed automation and recover margin to support and improve things? And I think that is a bit of what you're saying. And what you're trying to say, Mike, is maybe now is the time more than ever to make the case for that, because there's this increased focus on this is the team you got, so make it work. How
Yeah,
do
I mean, when I
for that?
when I worked at Puppet, we sold automation tools, and actually, we did better with companies that were in down business than we did in up business a lot of times. And so they were more interested in finding that efficiency. Not always, but that certainly wasn't rare. And then the other thing you can do for looking at, how to dim the lights is, okay, how do you reduce the cost? Well, if you're supporting 3 versions of something, can you support 2? Things like that. A lot of times those are the compromises that you can propose as a leader and get some traction with. The other thing I would say is always go with your, partner with your product managers, because if you both come to the rest of the leadership team and say, here's what we're going to do to make everything better, it's a lot better than just engineering, doing that solo.
And I think, sorry, Joe, I was just reading the comment that just came in. I do want to share one story about the ruthless prioritization part, right? So this is from a while back when I was working for a startup. The ruthless prioritization, so this was during the economic crisis, the previous one, 2008. And one of the things that we were faced with was to essentially go towards VMs, managing it ourselves, versus going to cloud, which at that point was pretty nascent. This was 2007. And at that point, we did not have a platform team. And so in the downturn, because we couldn't hire any more engineers who would have backend capabilities and things like that, what we decided was we essentially decided to delay a project by a year, get management approval on it, because that was a huge revenue gain for us, but we did not do that because the efficiencies could not be realized in that time frame. We delayed it, but at the same time, we developed tools internally to automate much of the VM orchestration. And so we invested in our own people to grow them, improve their skill set, provide us with what we needed so that we can wait for AWS and other technologies to catch up. And when we got back to that in 2009, we had like much more sort of traction that we could gain. So just to answer that question, that's one example of how we ruthlessly prioritize to say we do not want to go to cloud, we do not want to and use this new technology which will save us a lot on VM costs, and then we delayed that decision further.
That's a good one. Zoltan's question here is good. Michelle, Mike, have you had any examples you can think of in your career ever? Because I think that's the sort of heart of Zoltan's question of, does it ever really happen? Is there, have you ever seen a successful, hey, there's been we're not growing headcount a lot, or we're shrinking headcount, so therefore we will literally stop doing project X?
Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, I was going to say, I share Mike's experience, and a lot of times, no. But I have had a few occasions where I've seen this successful. And if I think about when and where it happened, there was a couple key things. First, there was a clear understanding of how the revenue would shift, right? And they could make that bet. So low risk, right? Easier type decision. Second, believe it or not, but especially in today's day and age where the CEO's tenure has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, when you have stable leadership, those leaders will make those hard decisions when they're stable. If they know they're going to be there and they can count on. Those that when leadership is turning, everybody's scared to make a decision that's going to put their neck on the line. So if they can avoid that decision, delay that decision, ignore that decision, they will. And so I've seen it done, but I'll tell you, it's few and far between.
Is that a metric that should be measured, Michelle? Mean time between leadership change?
I actually, in today's day and age, I do think so. It's something I studied in fielding in my recent grad studies, was the CEO's tenure over the last decade and how it's shrinking and how that is causing a lot more churn in businesses than people realize.
Yeah, that's a great. Well, this is all, just make sure I didn't miss another question. This is all, hold on, one came in. I was about to switch to the next one. So let's see, making data-driven decisions is critical, especially in this economy. How do your companies measure the cost versus benefit of automation versus improving efficiency before investing in it? That's a good setup.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple things here, but the key here is the leader has to understand the business impact of what they're doing. And, kind of to the previous point of when do you retire something, or have you ever been able to retire something? I have before, but it's always been, it was even things when I wasn't the most senior person in engineering. Sometimes I'd just make a call and I'd show up with all the data and be like, okay, this is stupid that we support this. Here's how much it costs a year. Here's how much we're taking it on it. Like, we're just underwater on this. And, people don't have a big problem with it if it's pretty obvious that it's been failing for a long period of time. Like, no one was willing to make the call for a long time, and you kind of can come back with it. But when it's something that's maybe a little newer or very close to a partner or something like that, it can be different. But from making a data-driven decision, it's kind of, the cost versus benefit. You basically have to say, well, what's it going to cost to invest in this automation? What's it going to cost in terms of time, human power, learning, education, all those things, maintenance of that automation. I mean, automation's not free to keep up and maintain. And then what are we doing if we don't do this? And you can kind of graph that out over time. And most companies that'll sell you any type of automation, whether it's tooling or consulting or whatever, they're happy to help you do that because that's part of their business model. And then, you can kind of look at it and say, yeah, we're underwater here, or we're above board, or this is going to have a payback in 9 months. Do we need that? Does our finance team want everything to pay back in a quarter right now? There are different rules that different finance teams will set. But the thing that I would say overall is, you also have to believe the estimates coming out of your engineers. If they say, well, this will only take 3 weeks to do. Yeah, right. I don't believe you. That's just my default stance at this point, running engineering for long enough. It's just, when people give you a date, you have to kind of figure out, how do I modify that and make adjustments to that in my own brain? Because engineers don't often hit dates. I mean, that's just the realistic part of it. I'm an engineer. I don't hit dates. It's just those things you have to control for those. And then, you also have to look at what you're spending on. Is there a way you can spend a little bit and get a quick win, or get some proof of concept before you go all in on a multi-million-dollar kind of engagement or something like that? So it all depends, I guess. But the point is, yes, you should definitely be doing an ROI for sure on that. And as that engineering leader, make sure you understand the business and make sure you understand and believe that ROI, so that you can ask questions or pick it apart or whatever. Because any vendor is going to give you an ROI that looks great on their end. I can tell you that. So.
This is a great, I'm going to take this opportunity. Oh, go ahead, Vilas, go ahead.
I just want to say one line to that question specifically, right? Is that I have actually noticed something contrary to automation, more automation. In fact, it's less automation, because there is more focus on, can we just do this manually for X amount of time till we get out of the hole, and then we can invest in automation. So I've actually seen, in some cases, the amount of investment reduce in automation and deferred. Like the example I provided, that is actually a real example where we could have done with more automation, but we didn't because of the fact that there was a downturn and we couldn't hire more helping hands to help us. So it's not always the case that there is a ROI discussion. Sometimes it's taken out of your hand and be like, no, we're not going to invest in anything. Do it manually for now.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a really good one, and actually, I'm seeing the chat here. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to move us along only very slightly, not off this topic, but Esther, if you can load up poll number 2 into the tool. So I'm going to pose out a question here to the audience. When the business asks, what are people working on? How do you answer that? And as engineering leaders, we hear this is a common question, but we do hear sometimes, hey, we have deep trust. And maybe, as Michelle said, if the team at the leadership level has been in place for a decade, they just kind of know because they know. Or some people are, spending half their engineering cycles just filling out spreadsheets, and would be curious how the audience kind of answers this effectively. And as those answers are coming in, I think it's a good, frankly, feed from the questions we were just having. Someone asked, I guess you answered this in the chat, but someone asked, when an engineer gives an estimate, do you believe they are padding it too much or too little? And
almost always too little, by the way. Almost always. So.
Agreed, 100%.
Yeah. And Lee's point here is also good, or I think the result, sorry, following the chat, the only thing you always know is that estimates are wrong, which goes back to perhaps this notion in the poll of everyone saying, or certainly most people saying, there's a lot of spreadsheets going around in addition to whatever other tools with Jira. So I'm just curious, what's your philosophical approach, all of you, Vilas, Michelle, Mike, on how to get a clear representation of what are people working on to understand everything from KTLO to automation to features, et cetera. How does this question get asked? Do you think it's just a lack of trust? How do you answer it? What's the evolution here?
Vilas, you want to go?
I can start. And I will tell you that there is no right answer. If there was a right answer, someone knows it, they can share it with us. That'll be awesome. I don't think there is a right answer here. It's a mix of multiple things. For example, back when I started working, we used to have spreadsheets to measure velocity for each team because we were newly agile. This was like in the 2000s. And then it has evolved into automated Jira collection and things like that. People have started adding GitLab data to it, which I don't agree with for individual developers. But anyway, there's all of those things, right? I don't think there is one answer to this. Eventually, what I feel is that program management, every company's program management, comes up with their unique way to measure value in any single initiative. And eventually that succeeds, and they usually determine it. I don't think this is something that from the engineering perspective, we get to drive. I'll at least say that's my opinion.
Yeah, this question to me is interesting because I always frame it differently depending on who's asking. If the product management team is asking, there's probably a good dialogue to be had about, resource allocation or where, what are we prioritizing in terms of features and things like that. If somebody else on the executive team is asking, there's probably something bad going on and they're trying to dig into it. And so you definitely want to figure out kind of what's the motivation for asking, because most of the time they don't ask the question in this way from the rest of the execs. They say, I'm waiting on this feature. Where's it at? They're not asking what's everybody else doing. Yeah. They're saying, where's this feature at? And so you kind of want to be able to answer that question on a moment's notice. But if they say, you have 300 engineers, show me their allocations, that doesn't come up that often other than partnering with product management, maybe. And outside of that, if that's just like, if that's coming up, they're probably looking at some kind of either cost reduction strategy or something like that, or we're going to, move to a low cost location for some engineers. Just like there's something bigger in play there, most likely. Not all the time, but it could be if you're also very small. Maybe the the executive team just wants to understand what everybody's doing. If you're a 30-person company or 50-person company or something like that. But it can vary a lot based on size. But I think most of the time when people ask this, there's a secondary set of questions that they're going to take with that answer. And I usually want to ask, let's talk about the bigger reason why this all matters and understand it a little bit, because I might frame it a little bit differently. A lot of times allocation is also a weird thing, where you say we're spending this percent of time on our favorite thing, but you look at that, how much time that actually is getting, and it's definitely not the percentage allocation that you've mentally allocated in your head. If you think, 30% of my time is going to this, you'll be lucky if it's 15. So, things like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mike there. I've been through enough acquisitions in the last 10 years when I get asked that question from someone outside of product management. There's definitely another question I want to have beyond that, understand why they're asking that.
Isn't, I guess, I'll ask it in a slightly different way. Is it the job of product management or the job of engineering to answer? Who really should answer where the dev time is going?
Oh, the engineering teams are responsible to answer it, because it doesn't matter who should answer it. Who gets to answer it is engineering. Like it's still going to come down to the engineering leadership to say, you have X number of people in the organization. What are they up to? And the question is not necessarily, sometimes it could be just exactly what Michael said. By the way, I agree with him completely. It's a secondary question of, are they being productive? Right? That's really the thing that someone is getting to, no matter at what cycle of the project you are in. That is definitely a engineering question. Engineering has to answer it. But I don't think PMs are, sure, PMs can help answer it, but I don't think they are they're probably, I think someone else mentioned it. I agree. PMs are usually the ones asking the question in addition to anyone else who's asking it. Yeah.
I think that totally depends, because I would prefer PM answer this question in most cases out to the rest of the exec team, because usually what the exec team cares about is, are we allocating appropriately to the to my favorite feature in my resource, my resource concerns. And like, if that's the case, a lot of times that is PM. The thing that I show up with in that discussion a lot of times is overall allocations of like, we're spending this much time on forward progress, this much time on maintenance, and this much time on, other things or whatever, and, or, support costs or whatever. But that's kind of globally, and I don't break it down by team. And then, they say, well, why are you spending 40% of your time on maintenance? And it's like, well, that's actually pretty normal to industry average. And they say, well, how do we get that down to 30? And then I'll say, okay, let me come back to you with a different plan, and I'll get you down to 30% on this. And like, we'll modify trade-offs. That doesn't go into each team and saying, here's what this team's doing and here's what that team's doing. And part of the reason for that is PM a lot of times is driving what this team is doing and that team is doing it. So if they want to have those conversations, I want them to happen at a product management viewpoint level. I'm happy to participate in those, but it's not, if somebody's telling you to build 10 things, you can basically slice and dice how those 10 things are built, but you can't say, actually, let's build 6. Like, that's not a thing that's not a decision that engineering gets most of the time. And so if that's the case, then if that's the case, then I need some help with that question. So
here's what I feel like I've heard. What you say it as a joke once was, the best way to know if you're going to meet your goals is work on them. And I mean, it was sort of a silly quip, but yes, I think, Mike, you're exactly right, which is when a business, CEO is asking it, what they really want to know is when the heck are they going to get their feature? There's something, the product needs to support, China or something like that. When's it going to do it? And they're not happy with the deadline was missed, or they want it sooner. And the best thing you can do is say, well, I have, 10% of my staff working on it, because that's the real, at some level, like, if you want it to be 20, then what can we drop? It's the trade-off conversation is what I feel like I hear in that. Or perhaps what you're saying is the overhead cost, really articulating that clearly. Sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah. If you're getting asked, why can't I have that sooner? Or, I need this now, right? A lot of times that might come from a salesperson. It may come from anyone in the exec team, right? You get it from all over. And I think that one of the big keys is, first and foremost, you need to acknowledge them that they're asking for that, and you understand why it's important to them, right? Make sure you you clearly articulate, like, I understand. Yeah. I definitely hear you. Now, let me expose you to what we're working on and what's priorities, and then offer up with your PM, here are alternatives, but these are decisions we have to make. So there has to be a trade-off, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing I've seen some engineering leaders do is just like, no. There's a reason why they're asking you this. This is a business thing. So bring your PM in, if they come to you directly, bring the PM in, say, hey, let me bring Joe over here, and let's walk through what our alternatives might look like if this is really that important.
Yeah.
I have one thing to add to what Michelle just said. Michelle, I think you had a really good point, which is an extremely self-aware leader who understands the context, understands the subtext, and then presents that the right way. I think that's a relatively small subset of leaders who do that. Usually leaders walk in head first and they are like, oh my God, now I have to do this. And to that point, what ends up happening is they come up with trade-offs and no one accepts it, right? Because guess what? The leadership that asking them, executive leadership is asking them for, I want this and that. I don't care how you get me that. That's what I need. So I think what you pointed out is the preparation, right? For a leader to say, okay, I know this might happen. And maybe that's a public service announcement. If you have not done it, you should do it for your own teams to make sure that you are aware. And I think, Michelle, that point is something that's underappreciated. I mean, leaders who have that skill is underappreciated.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I've come up with a lot with is kind of just allocation discussions of, do you understand how much time we're spending on support? Do you understand how much time we're spending on maintenance and things like that? And and they'll say, "Well, I don't care about that stuff." And it's like, well, you do care about it, because if you don't renew, your revenue takes a big dive. So support matters. Maintenance means we can't deliver as fast in the future. But I think one of the things that I've shown up a lot with is just kind of allocation of other types of time for people. Like on average, 12% of the office is out on PTO. That's a weird thing to think about, that no one ever sits there and puts into their plan. And so if you can kind of put that in front of somebody and show them that, now you have a different discussion point, and they're like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about this, in a different way. Or they might say, I don't care, but it's at least new data for them. And that's just something else that you can put in front of you when you have the right sliced and diced of your data. Some people have a lot of data when they run engineering, some have little, and you can kind of put that together in different ways to tell different stories. But one of my favorite things to do is just think about allocations and be like, hey, before you even start, you start with an 88% bucket. You don't start with a 100% bucket just because of the way PTO goes. So
yeah, and that's before COVID and all the other stuff
right.
out there. It's a great segue, Mike. I'm going to use this opportunity, Esther, if you could kick up the third poll. And we're going to ask this back out to the audience. How would you rate your organization's use of insights generally? So things like DORA, SPACE, employee satisfaction surveys, maybe allocation reports, et cetera. And we've sort of put a spectrum here of, we are flying blind on great trust, or we are, diligently doing everything we can in this space. And would be interested to see how the audience responds to this. And I think this really gets to maybe the heart of what all three of you, especially Michelle, was sort of commenting on, which is, hey, we understand you want this feature faster. That's really the question you're trying to ask here, right? You want to know, are we working on, we have to go to China or do something in the product, whatnot. So how do you all, or how have you objectively responded to why can't XYZ feature be delivered sooner? Vilas, you want to start?
Just sure. I usually, this is something that I've read a couple of books on, because I used to be extremely frank and be like, no, we can't get this done. And I learned that there is a negotiation. That is exactly what it is that it's a negotiation, right? When someone comes to you and says, hey, this is what we need, and this when we need it by, there is multiple dimensions to push back on, right? And I think by educating myself on it, I've been able to protect the team often on saying, yes, we can get it done, but not necessarily in the time frame, or not necessarily with the scope that you're asking for, and so on. And that allows that wiggle room to enable the team to do good work, right? And the other thing is to also take the conversation towards something where saying the team has done this, do we want just an extension of it, or is it brand new work or something? So I think that is the part which I fear people don't necessarily get the first time, because when it comes from someone higher up, you see it as an order, as a marching order, like, yeah, you have to get it done. But then there are levers, right? Levers are dimensions along, like I said, scope, time of delivery, size of the capacity of the team, and things like that. And also maybe other things like, oh, I've already worked on this. Do we need to just abandon that? And all of the stuff we talked about before. So, and for all of this, these metrics that we just put on the poll, those can help. And there is probably strategies around that. But yeah, I'll give it to Michelle next.
Yeah, well, your note about negotiation makes me think of that book, Getting to Yes, right?
Yes, that's the one. That's the one.
Yeah,
yes.
So all leaders need to know that. But I think what that really hits on, which is, in my organizations, one of the first thing I do when I come into every organization, I bring kind of two tools with me. One is really around accountability and like what are unaccountable behaviors and what are accountable. And unaccountable, like, we'll point and we'll like ignore it. We'll not acknowledge your requests. We'll blame others. We'll say it's the keep the lights on is too expensive. Like, we'll do all kinds of things, but have a real conversation, right? And then the other tool I bring in is that notion of and, right? Avoiding the but. And okay, I hear what you're asking, and let me help you understand where we're at, so maybe we can work together on this. That's the negotiation part, right? Which is bringing them along, help them get into your shoes and see from your perspective, and you get into their shoes and see from their perspective, right? I think I was just talking to an engineering leader right before this session, and he said one of his big learnings over the last year was he was a QA leader, and now he's over a full product team. And he said the big learning was the change in perspective. I see things differently now. And I didn't see that before, even though I was in the same org, right? But that change of perspective. So remember that when somebody comes to you, put yourself in their shoes. Why are they asking for this? They're probably getting pressure for quarterly revenue, or they're getting pressure for whatever it is, right? But then also help them get in your shoes and understand where you're coming from so that you can find that and you can get to that yes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as you progress through your career in engineering or leadership, like the way you say no changes, and I think that's a really important thing. And so a lot of times it is a yes, or it's I come back with a lot of pithy one-liners on things where people ask for things, and I'll say we can do everything, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So help me figure out which things matter most. I could do this, but that means I'm going to throw away these 2 other things that were 80% of the way through, which means that now you have 100% waste on those because they're not getting finished. It's things like that. So you can always have those conversations about how you're doing trade-offs and things like that. But I mean, you basically just have to have negotiations the entire way through. So I don't think we're going to rehash that. But yeah.
And one other thing which I think we touched on in many ways, but which is trust. And I see that whenever there is a down market, right, it's not like trust is eroded or anything like that. It's just that people don't feel that they're comfortable anymore, right? So that results in you trusting others.
I disagree. Trust is completely eroded in a down market. Okay. If you've laid off people, you've broken
completely
trust.
Eroded? Okay.
Like, so.
Yeah, there's no safety, right? There's no like, why should I feel safe if the market is down and we're being impacted? Look at who was it that just recently did a second round or a third round of big, massive layoffs, right? Like the people that were behind after the first one, after the third one, are they like, yeah, I feel totally safe. Like that's not going to happen again. Oh, wait, it just happened.
That's
right?
true. That's true. No, I hear you. Yeah. I think now I get it. I think what Michael is saying is to that point, right? What I was talking about is for the folks who remain at the higher levels, right? As soon as it's before all the layoffs happen, right? They immediately feel unsafe even before that, right? So the question is, like Michelle, you said, getting to that yes is harder because it takes more to convince them that you're negotiating with trust. And that's what I was getting to. But yeah, I mean, on the second point that you mentioned, I completely agree.
This is such a great point.
No
there's a couple questions on the insights I want to get back to, but this is such a sort of timely point. What are the best? Let's admit that trust, I would certainly also contend, is harder in a down market. As much as anything, companies are laying off, and so then people feel like they have less optionality in the market, and everyone sort of generally understands it's you have to focus. We see this a lot. We're doing less recruiting and retention and more just optimization of, let's make sure we're ruthlessly prioritizing, right? That's where management's spending more time. But you still have the team you have, and you still have to get that done. Mm-hmm. How do you balance we are trying to ruthlessly prioritize, set up the right insights and metrics, do our allocations right, and then have some level of trust with that remaining team that keeps it solid, because the trust is eroded and everyone's trust is eroded. What are your tactics for having harmony on the team?
So for me, that's why, like, transparency, I talked about it at the beginning, is a core value of mine, because in times like these, if you have been transparent all along, when something like this happens, you need to continue to be transparent, and you need to be empathetic to the situation that your engineers are in and what they're feeling, right? You need to acknowledge it. At the same time, you need to make sure there's a clear mission that the team is on. There's a clear way that they're impacting their customers or providing value for their customers, the problems they're solving. Like, why are they there, right? At the end of the day, becomes super important for them. As you said, maybe they can go somewhere else, or maybe they feel like they can't because the market is down. Whatever it is, you still want to create this environment where you're transparent with them about what's going on. You can't I see someone's comment in there about, like, my team asked me if there'll be a second round. No leader can answer that question. What it can answer is, here's where we're at as a company, here's where our financials are, our public financials, right? Here's what we're doing. And ultimately, this is what we need to do for our customers, right? And
Okay,
so
well,
I always go back to that transparency.
I didn't mean to catch up. I love that, and I love that answer. But Manuj's question is good here in the chat, and you called it. So, what is the actual answer? Okay, you just did a layoff. Are you doing another one?
No
The
one can
actual
ever
answer is
predict
probably I don't know.
Yeah.
So
and that doesn't help build trust. But you have to set
yeah.
up. It's not just transparency; it's authenticity with it. Like I think you need to show
Yeah.
that like you have some belief or some impact by this. The first time I had to lay people off was absolutely the hardest day of my career, without a doubt. And like, it's not, I couldn't even tell you what number 2 is because it's so far distant from number 1. And so like, and I think people saw that, you know, after when I got the team that was remaining together, I think they were like, wow, okay, he cared about this and really, really wanted to, you know, do the best he could through that situation. And I think I was told multiple times, they really appreciated the way I handled it. The other thing you can't do is throw your other leaders under the bus. Well, they made this decision and screw those people because I wouldn't have done it this way. Like, you just can't do that as a leader. You have to still own the message, but also, you know, provide some authenticity through it and provide your own perspective. You can all agree that it's not fun and that it sucks and that, you know, we wish this wasn't the way that it had to be right now, but, you know, it does. And here's how we're going to get through it together. And, you know, I also think it's, maybe jump to a little early in terms of cuts and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of options of not backfilling people first, or there's, you know, tool cut spending, or I think there's a lot of things you should go through before you do layoffs, because layoffs have compounding morale issues over time. I would use that as an absolute last resort. Like, I had no other option on the table. And I think particularly with this round of layoffs, they feel more like a technological contagion or like an epidemic than like an actual, like, this is actually what matters for revenue. I mean, you know, look at the big tech companies and how much revenue they're pulling in, and they're still laying off, you know, 10% or 15%. It's like, come on, this is just, this is not because of revenue. This is because of something else. Agreed. But you know, what could it be? So
Right. Yeah.
I want to share something. So back in the day, about 11 years ago, is the first time we had to do some layoffs within the team. The honest truth at that point was that we weren't ready as a team. I wasn't ready as a leader to accept that that responsibility, very honestly. And being absolutely honest with the team in that time actually helped, because the team is part of your everyday thing. Like, you cannot give them BS and expect them to help you out the next day. That is where you may not gain their immediate trust, and that erosion might happen and stick around for a few weeks, but at least they know that this person stood up and said the truth, right? And I think that's important. You do not want to hide behind generic statements or things like that. Like, I think the worst thing is blaming others, which is easy to do, but is extremely trust eroding in the long term, because you always are like, oh yeah, this person has no control, and I work for this person. What are my chances? So I think it's a very hard decision, and I think everyone that I know of remembers that feeling with an extreme, like, it's an uncomfortable feeling, but sharing that discomfort openly with your team shows authenticity. And I would go back to what Michelle said. I completely agree that transparency is super key.
Yeah, and I would say as a leader, because I mean, I remember first time I had to let someone go. In that layoff, I actually let myself go too, because I had to let go, you know, I don't know, 10% of my org or whatever the number was. And at the time, I didn't see clear strategy from our executive team of how we weren't going to get into this situation again. And so when it came time to do it, I said, okay, well, I'm number one, and then, you know, I'll figure out the rest, but I'm not going to stay here if I don't have a good sense that we've got a clear strategy forward. Right. So, you know, I do think authenticity and really making sure as a leader, you're asking the right questions when you're asked to hit a number or whatever. Ask those questions, ask those tough questions, because make sure you can then articulate that to your team why you believe that you're headed in the right direction, that this isn't, you know, going to be a thing that's going to happen every 2 days, or, you know what I mean? Like, make sure you understand that.
And I think collecting data is key. I think the poll was around like Dora metrics and the space framework and things like that. All of them are your everyday, like day-to-day things to measure so that you can essentially, you don't need to necessarily present it every single day, but when it comes to times like these, it has proven to be invaluable for me to showcase how valuable the team's contribution has been and how much of an effective team they are, right? If there are improvements in efficiency needed, that's fine, but they're effective. They're getting the right thing done. And that essentially has helped me a lot in terms of being able to walk executives off the ledge on like, oh yeah, don't worry about this team. Like we should be fine. This is what we're delivering. And I think that's something that I would strongly recommend every leader to do during peacetime so that you're ready for that wartime setup.
Well, that's a good, and it's a great, Vilas, we're watching the clock here, a couple minutes left. Lee, I see your question. I'm going to get to that in a minute. If there's any other questions in the chat, I'll sort of take that. We'll probably have time for one or two more, but I do think there's a connection. I just want to call out and kind of open this point. All of you are talking about great trust and transparency now more than ever. I mean, it's important always, but it kind of, the benefits of it really shine when you have to give hard messages. Great. And the need for metrics to understand efficiency, allocation, productivity, et cetera. And what's interesting in this poll is the sort of peanut butter spread of really all over the place between, hey, we're super great at it, we don't even know about it, and that's just the state of the market for this stuff. How would you message the, hey, you've always had my trust, I've been a trustworthy, open, transparent leader, no change in that. This is a tough time, and now I have to go, really do some deeper instrumentation around really showing that we're allocating correctly, working productively on the right things. That feels like a tough message to deliver, even though it's probably more important now than ever. How do you balance that?
I think that if you can talk about kind of the right outcomes from a team perspective, a good team is more fun to work on. Like it's just more enjoyable. And so like if you can ship more often, or if you can get faster feedback loops, or if you can get less time spent in incidents, those are all good things. And that's what, a lot of those metrics are really built around and based upon. And so if you can kind of say, hey, we're going to make some investments in this so that we're a better team, most teams are pretty okay with that. They might say, yeah, you're going to measure me a little differently, but they can feel it. Like they don't need the measurements, they can feel it. And so that's one of the things I guess I would look at before I would take like a layoff into consideration. It might be, can I optimize these teams? Can I get these teams to work better? And then if I get more output, does that, offset revenue differences or, whatever? Like it's a possibility. I don't know that it's always realistic, but that's something that I would really take to heart is like, how do you get these teams to just be a higher performing set of teams? And, and I'm sure not all teams are created equal. So if you have, 10 teams in engineering, 2 or 3 are probably way above the rest. And so like, okay, what can you model and copy from them and things like that? But I think people only care about measurements and they feel like they're going to be used negatively against them. But if you also say like, hey, we want to be able to ship, 5 times a day, and right now we can only ship once every 2 days, they're gonna be like, cool, I know what that means in terms of investments that we're allowed to make, in terms of upgrades, improvements, and changes in process. And you say, yeah, and we're going to measure that and we're going to report out on it. And they're going to be like, cool, that means it matters because it's a metric that's showing up somewhere else. And so, depending on how you're doing these things, you can really frame it as actually, I'm trying to make your life easier. I've been an engineer. It sucks when you're just sitting there waiting for a change ticket to get approved. Like, let's not do that. Things like that. So.
Yeah. And I think during this time, like when there is a down market, the toughest job is you can't necessarily celebrate or incentivize rewards for these folks as you would want to, because you want to make sure that the folks who are in the teams, they know that they are doing great work and provide that feedback and incentive. And that's the hard part. So I think the big thing for me is you have to creatively figure out how you celebrate that, right? It could be something as simple as providing some t-shirt that says, I don't know, best employee of the month kind of thing, like something to says employee with the least bugs this month or something like that. But even those very, I would say, like maybe stupid things that help us actually make the team feel better. So I 100% agree with Michael. It's about the feel. You can't fake it. Like if the team feels it, it feels it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get it done. But that's where the thing is, which is extremely hard because budgets get cut. You can't take the team out for a lavish meal, but what you can do is you can probably do something simpler, but make them know that they're cared for.
That is a great wrap up this session. I've just truly enjoyed this. I want to be mindful of time here. I think some really great takeaways are to remember that engineering is about being proud of what you're working on and being on that team that just has that positive vibe, which there's no amount of metrics that will tell you. There is just a feel there, but overlaying that with super transparent leadership that does able to sort of justify, improve, and show the efficiency in some way that the business can understand, because there's that balance that you have to have as an engineering leader. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you to all the attendees and the chat and the great thoughtful comments and questions. We will continue a rolling thunder of these over the next few months. Feel free to reach out to any of the folks here on LinkedIn or questions, and we'll distribute this recording virtually as well. But really enjoyed the conversation. Thank Vilas, Michelle, and Michael for your time this afternoon, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care.